This video is based on online discussions and unverified podcast commentary. No music, medical condition, or personal health information about any individual has been confirmed or stated. This content is for commentary purposes only. Right now, Hollywood isn't shaking over a petty breakup, a surprise diss track, or a leaked DM. Something far quieter and far more ominous is moving in the shadows. Jaguar Wright claims the industry has been deliberately shielding a select inner circle of high-profile men, all entangled in a series of private events she described as quietly dangerous, centered around Teyana Taylor. In a tense live stream, Jaguar didn't beat around the bush. She spoke with deliberate precision. No hedging, no sugarcoating. She called names. She didn't hint. She pointed directly at Iman Shumpert, suggesting he may have been the first to notice that beneath the surface, something deeply unsettling was unfolding. And then the list of names kept coming. Drake, Chris Brown, Aaron Pierre, even Kanye West. Then, a single name cut through the room like lightning: Leonardo DiCaprio. Jaguar Wright framed these figures not as lovers or coincidences, but as part of a hidden, intricate pattern that almost no one was ever meant to see. This wasn't a story of romance gone wrong. It was about stakes, about secrecy, about who Hollywood chooses to shield when private situations spiral out of control. She claimed that once certain behind-closed-doors events occurred, the system moved with eerie efficiency. Legal teams stepped in before questions could be asked. NDAs were signed before feelings were processed. Publicists reshaped stories overnight. And just like that, everything changed. Personalities shifted. Anxiety crept in. Bonds dissolved without warning. Relationships ended silently. Fans began noticing vanishing acts, delayed projects, and emotional cracks appearing seemingly out of nowhere. But Jaguar Wright insists none of this ever reached the headlines, because it was never meant to. Those who seemed unstable in the aftermath weren't supported. They were quietly undermined. Not for dishonesty, but because the truths they carried were dangerous to the system itself. This, she emphasized, wasn't some celebrity scandal for gossip columns. It was a warning shot aimed at the entire industry. And, she said, what she revealed in that live stream was far from the full picture, just the first visible crack in a wall that has long concealed something far more serious. Buckle up. Beneath the perfect smiles and red carpet glitter, Hollywood has always mastered the art of hiding cracks instead of fixing them. What unfolded during Jaguar Wright's live stream wasn't confusion. It wasn't emotional chaos. It was deliberate, controlled. The kind of measured delivery that only someone who knows exactly how heavy the story is and why it was buried for so long can command. She didn't open with drama. She opened with silence. The kind of silence that exists only when those in power collectively choose not to speak. According to Jaguar Wright, that silence didn't shield everyone. It protected reputations, while others quietly fractured out of public view. She claimed that for years, a troubling, hidden pattern circulated behind the scenes, centering on Teyana Taylor and a rotating circle of high-profile men whose influence spans music, sports, and film. She emphasized this wasn't about romance, it was about risk. Decisions made in secret. Choices carrying consequences, far heavier than emotion. Consequences, she said, that were never fully disclosed to everyone involved. And when whispers of concern finally surfaced, Jaguar Wright alleged the response wasn't transparency. It was containment. Damage control executed instantly. She suggested Iman Shumpert was among the first to sense that something was off. Not in headlines, not publicly, but in subtle changes that only those closest to him would notice. Shifts in behavior. Guarded conversations. Distance where comfort once existed. That, she claimed, wasn't a lone warning. It was the start of a pattern. As time moved forward, more names surfaced. Drake, Chris Brown, Aaron Pierre, Kanye West. Each name added weight, not through accusation, but by implication. A hidden thread connecting them, a pattern of quiet risk followed by controlled silence. Then came the name that changed everything, Leonardo DiCaprio. According to Jaguar Wright, it wasn't about what was said publicly, it was about what was never meant to be discussed. The room shifted when she spoke Leonardo DiCaprio's name. She didn't need to accuse. The suggestion alone carried enough gravity to hint at how far-reaching this concealed network might be. Once quiet alarms rang internally, Hollywood moved with a playbook perfected over decades. Legal teams stepped in before honest talks could occur. Publicists rewrote narratives before emotions were processed. NDAs weren't protection, they were armor. She claimed records existed. Messages. Insider confirmations. Not leaked. Not online. Stored in secure spaces accessible to a select few. According to Jaguar Wright, these hidden materials explained years of puzzling moments. Relationships ending abruptly. Projects quietly stalled or vanished. Artists withdrawing under vague, personal reasons. She alleged these reasons were never personal, they were calculated. Strategic. Designed to redirect attention and minimize exposure. She spent significant time on Aaron Pierre, portraying him as unprepared emotionally for the environment he entered. After certain relationships ended, his demeanor shifted in ways heartbreak alone couldn't explain. Confusion lingered. Anxiety misaligned with the narrative. A sense of dependency, the inner conflict of someone realizing they were part of something far larger than they understood. Jaguar Wright framed this not as weakness, but as a warning sign the industry refuses to acknowledge. She claimed that when someone shows visible distress in private matters, the system doesn't offer clarity. It isolates. Their reliability quietly questioned behind closed doors. Emotional states become liabilities rather than concerns. Not in headlines, but in whispers. Doubts that slowly erode trust and credibility without leaving visible marks. Piece by piece, credibility was stripped away. Jaguar Wright said the same subtle distancing unfolded around Amon Shumpert. No public fallout. No scandals. No explosions. Just a slow, almost invisible retreat. Invitations disappeared. Familiar energy shifted. Connections that once felt solid went cold. To outsiders, it looked like a routine breakup. According to her, it was anything but ordinary. She described a silent infrastructure built not for truth, but for containment. Private consultations behind closed doors. Carefully worded guidance from insiders who never documented anything damaging. Reputation managers coordinating with legal teams, always steps ahead of public curiosity. According to Jaguar Wright, accountability wasn't the goal. Containment was. Containment of panic. Of liability. Of questions no one wanted asked aloud. During this period, Teyana Taylor reportedly remained in constant motion. Travel never slowed. Appearances stacked back to back. According to her, stillness invites scrutiny. Motion creates noise. Noise distracts. Noise protects. Noise scatters attention. Relationships ended abruptly, without closure. No explanations. Just distance, silence, and forward momentum. She claimed that when quiet whispers began surfacing online, they disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Blogs hesitated. Journalists stalled. Stories entered legal review and never resurfaced. According to Jaguar Wright, access itself became a weapon of control. Speak up, and doors silently close. Push too hard, and credibility erodes until your voice no longer carries weight. She alleged that collaborators and peripheral figures were discreetly advised to stay away, not because they were guilty, but because proximity had become a liability. This, she insisted, wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. For Jaguar Wright, this was never about morality or public outrage. It was about control, absolute uncompromising control. Throughout her career, she stressed one point repeatedly. She wasn't trying to destroy anyone's career. She spoke because real people were being left emotionally fractured, while the machinery around them continued to operate flawlessly. In her eyes,
Medicine for Melancholy,
had crossed a dangerous
directed by
threshold.
Barry Jenkins.
What began as strategy had mutated into something ethically questionable. She framed it as a systemic collapse, an industry willing to treat human suffering as acceptable collateral as long as the brand, the image, and the illusion remained untarnished. As the live stream neared its end, Jaguar Wright didn't issue threats or ultimatums. She delivered warnings. She made it clear, more names exist. More evidence exists. More hidden connections remain undisclosed. What the public had been allowed to see so far, she implied, was barely the surface, the outermost layer of a massive, concealed structure. Hollywood, she argued, isn't grappling with gossip. It's grappling with a crisis of trust. And the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones that destroy careers overnight. They're the ones that follow people home, quietly reshaping lives in ways no headline could ever capture. What she revealed, she said, didn't vanish when the live stream ended. The most unsettling part wasn't the words spoken publicly. It was the truths everyone already knew but collectively chose to ignore. Jaguar Wright described how, once the first alarms rang behind closed doors, the industry didn't collapse into chaos. It moved with precision. Coordination replaced panic. Phone calls replaced texts. Meetings occurred without schedules. Guidance was delivered verbally, never written down. According to her, this wasn't a reaction to scandal. It was a playbook, perfected over decades for moments when exposure threatens power. She alleged that certain figures were quietly encouraged to step back, recalibrate their visibility, and retreat just long enough for narratives to be rewritten and pressure to dissipate. Not as punishment, as procedure. These adjustments subtly controlled public perception. Disappear long enough, and the story rewrites itself without resistance. When questions inevitably arose, answers were already prepared. Creative burnout, emotional exhaustion, scheduling conflicts, simple explanations masking far more complex realities. Meanwhile, those at the center never paused. According to Jaguar Wright, Teyana Taylor never slowed down during the most sensitive stretch. Projects overlapped seamlessly. Appearances remained polished. Public image stayed flawless. In her view, that momentum wasn't ambition. It was calculated strategy. Stillness invites scrutiny. Motion overwhelms it. Behind closed doors, however, Jaguar Wright alleged that others were processing a far darker reality. She returned to Aaron Pierre, suggesting that what audiences read as mood swings or emotional distance ran far deeper. Confusion without context. Anxiety without explanation. The kind of psychological strain that emerges when someone is expected to comply silently while being discouraged from asking questions. According to Jaguar Wright, when these individuals expressed discomfort, they weren't offered clarity. They were managed. Their reactions reframed as instability. Concerns dismissed as overreactions. She claimed this reframing wasn't random. Once someone is labeled unreliable, their voice loses power. Their words stop influencing outcomes. According to her, this quiet discrediting happened repeatedly, not in headlines, not through public attacks, but via subtle professional erosion. Missed calls. Delayed responses. Opportunities quietly evaporating. Nothing dramatic enough to confront directly, just enough to isolate. She suggested the same pattern unfolded around Amon Shumpert. No accusations. No public fallout. Just a slow, nearly invisible retreat from spaces where questions might surface too freely. To fans, it looked like a normal recalibration of private life. According to Jaguar Wright, it was anything but ordinary. She hinted at something even deeper.
Do you know Letterboxd?
A protective perimeter
I'm
forming
about to know what's up.
Okay,
extending
Letterboxd
far
is this.
beyond personal relationships. Collaborators were discreetly warned. Associates advised to keep conversations surface level. Anyone nearby became a variable to monitor and control. She alleged that Drake and Chris Brown were pulled into this web not because of public incidents, but because of private intersections, connections never meant to see the light of day. The issue, she stressed, wasn't the actions themselves. It was the engineered silence that followed, deliberate, enforced. Then there was Kanye West. Jaguar Wright suggested that when someone already labeled unpredictable enters these hidden dynamics, the industry's response escalates, not to shield the individual, but to protect the system itself. Unpredictability threatens carefully controlled narratives, and controlled narratives are the backbone of reputation management. This, she implied, explains why some voices are amplified while others are muted, why some breakdowns erupt publicly while others are meticulously contained. It isn't about truth. It's about control, about who can be contained and who cannot. Shifting from individuals to the system itself, Jaguar Wright outlined an unspoken hierarchy of crisis management. Legal advisors first, then publicists, then reputation strategists. Emotional considerations only enter after narratives are secured, if at all. She claimed that non-disclosure agreements were more than legal tools. They were psychological instruments. They didn't just silence. They isolated. Once signed, individuals were left alone with experiences they could not discuss, even with those closest to them. Individuals were left alone with experiences they could never voice, not even to those closest to them. According to Jaguar Wright, this enforced isolation was the most corrosive consequence of all because when people cannot speak, they internalize it. And when internalization becomes inevitable, fractures begin to form. She alleged that journalists sensed something was off long before the public ever noticed. Tips arrived. Questions were prepared. Leads were pursued, but stories stalled. Editors grew wary. Legal teams intervened. Access itself became currency. Pushed too hard, and doors didn't just close, they slammed shut permanently. Blogs went silent. Investigations quietly dissolved. Even the chaos-driven world of the internet oddly moved on. Jaguar Wright suggested this was no coincidence. It was influence at work, precise and deliberate. As fragments of the story leaked online, fans began piecing together anomalies. Sudden breakups with no explanation. Projects paused indefinitely. Public figures vanishing at career highs. According to Jaguar Wright, these were not isolated events. They were symptoms of a system that values continuity over accountability. She made it clear, this wasn't about turning one woman into a villain or shielding powerful men. It was about revealing how quickly real human lives are minimized when they threaten profitable images. Some individuals were quietly advised to seek private guidance, all while being told, directly or indirectly, to remain silent. Not because speaking out would be wrong, but because it was inconvenient. Jaguar Wright framed that silence as coercion. As the live stream progressed, the tone shifted from revelation to warning. She stated bluntly, what she had shared was only scratching the surface. The names mentioned were fragments of a far larger web. Documentation existed not only in messages, but in behavioral patterns, timelines, and abrupt shifts the public had long dismissed as coincidence. According to Jaguar Wright, once you start connecting the dots, the story transforms entirely. She warned that when silence becomes standard, harm spreads quietly, almost invisibly. Toward the end of her session, Jaguar Wright confronted the inevitability of backlash. She expected to be labeled bitter, unstable, attention-seeking, and she claimed that such labels were useful. Because when truth comes from someone already dismissed, the public finds it easier to ignore. Yet she insisted, ignoring the story does not make it disappear. According to her, the industry is already under strain, not in headlines, not in public statements, but internally. Trust has fractured. Conversations are shifting. Alliances are being carefully measured. People are watching each other more closely than ever before. Once secrecy is breached, it loses some of its power. Jaguar Wright ended with a statement that felt less like a conclusion and more like a gateway. This wasn't about destroying careers. It was about confronting a culture that discards people the moment they stop being convenient. A culture where silence is rewarded, honesty punished. She cautioned, more revelations will inevitably surface, not because she seeks them, but because secrecy-built systems eventually fail. According to Jaguar Wright, Hollywood is approaching a moment it cannot fully control. The most devastating damage, she warned, won't come from headlines or cancellations. It will emerge as a slow, creeping realization. Trust was sacrificed long before anyone heard the truth. Once that understanding settles, No amount of image management can restore what was lost. That reckoning didn't vanish when the live stream ended. It lingered. It seeped into behavior, timing, and subtle choices that suddenly no longer made sense. According to Jaguar Wright, when silence cracks, it doesn't erupt. It leaks, quietly, relentlessly, with ripples far beyond anyone's expectation. What followed wasn't backlash. It was recalibration. Jaguar Wright described how, in the days after, the tone across the industry shifted subtly. Conversations shortened. Language became measured, precise. Familiar alliances began to feel fragile. Not because anyone had been publicly accused, but because everyone understood the silent warning of being mentioned in a system built on deniability. According to Jaguar Wright, the response was immediate, invisible, deliberate, and surgical. No press releases. No denials. No legal filings for headlines. Instead, quiet internal advisories circulated. Strategic distancing unfolded. Circles constricted. This, she said, is how power defends itself when exposure threatens the foundation rather than the facade. Jaguar Wright returned to the concept of proximity, how being close to a story like this can be just as perilous as being at its center. She claimed that some collaborators quietly withdrew from projects without explanation. Others declined public appearances. Invitations went unanswered. This wasn't panic. It was calculation. She framed it as a loyalty test. Who stays silent? Who asks questions? And who suddenly becomes inconvenient? According to Jaguar Wright, true reputations aren't decided on stages or screens. They are decided behind closed doors, where access is currency. Some chose safety over truth. Others were left isolated simply for hesitating too long. She referenced Teyana Taylor, not as a figure to vilify, but as a symbol of how swiftly narratives are shielded when money and image are at stake. Every public appearance was flawless. Every absence justified. Every question deftly redirected. This was no accident. It was rehearsed. Rehearsed. Jaguar Wright insisted that those on the edges, the periphery, felt the consequences most acutely. People without teams, without shields. People who couldn't afford even a hint of misstep. Hesitation was recast as instability. Withdrawal reframed as unreliability. She returned once again to Aaron Pierre, suggesting that what the public saw as a quiet retreat was actually survival. Navigating enforced silence required constant vigilance. Every word a potential risk. Every pause a deliberate maneuver. She described this as psychological erosion, slow, methodical, cumulative. Confidence replaced by caution. Curiosity replaced by compliance. Jaguar Wright argued that this is how systems maintain control without ever appearing to touch anyone. Speaking isn't forbidden. It's made unbearably costly. She suggested that Amon Shumpert and others experienced variations of this quiet pressure. No confrontations. No ultimatums. Just a subtle understanding. Proximity to certain questions could quietly shrink opportunities. Most people, she said, don't need threats. They only need to witness what happens to those who aren't careful. Expanding the lens, she included the media ecosystem itself. Reporters often sense the gravity of a story long before the public does, yet they recognize the danger. Sources go silent. Editors demand confirmations that can never exist. Legal teams raise alarms, not over accuracy but over exposure. Stories die quietly, Jaguar Wright claimed, not because they are untrue, but because permission to tell them never exists. The public assumes silence equals nothing happened. But silence rarely means nothing, she warned. It often means too much occurred hidden behind closed doors. While social media churned over shallow drama, the real story remained deliberately shielded. Fans debated timelines, motives, personalities, all while the central truth stayed obscured. She framed this as strategy. Feed the public a minor distraction and they never notice what's being actively protected. And they never notice what's being actively shielded. Jaguar Wright alleged that Drake, Chris Brown, and Kanye West weren't dragged into the conversation by public drama. They appeared because of orchestrated silence. When multiple A-list figures sidestep the same subject, she warned, it's rarely by accident. Jaguar Wright didn't point fingers at personal guilt. She pointed to a system, a mechanism that values continuity over clarity. Agreements meant to protect brands instead isolate people. Guidance presented as supportive,
Medicine for Melancholy,
directed
by Barry Jenkins.
Reshaped into controlled behavior whenever profit is on the line. She argued that this is how trust erodes, slowly, invisibly, almost imperceptibly. It's not outright lies that damage people, it's the lack of information that prevents them from defending themselves emotionally. Jaguar Wright suggested the industry overlooked a critical factor: memory. Fans notice absences. Audiences detect inconsistencies. Patterns outlast headlines. Once people start connecting the dots, containment becomes precarious. Not impossible, but fragile. She warned that the next chapter wouldn't erupt in a single explosion. It would build piece by piece. Small confirmations. Subtle behavioral shifts. Moments that defy the official narrative. This progression, she emphasized, wasn't a threat, it was inevitability. Systems built on silence, she said, eventually collapse under their own contradictions. As she neared the close of her session, Jaguar Wright acknowledged the personal cost of speaking out. Backlash, character attacks, public doubt, all expected. She welcomed them. Because discrediting the messenger, she said, is far easier than dismantling the message. But she made it clear, the story doesn't belong to her. It belongs to the bewildered, the quietly sidelined, the ones forced to move forward without answers. She framed this not as anger or vengeance, but as reckoning. A reckoning born from exhaustion, from watching silence and control quietly crush real lives. Exhaustion from watching truth filtered through layers of legal maneuvering until it became unrecognizable. Jaguar Wright stressed that Hollywood could have chosen transparency early, but it didn't. And now, she said, the cost is far heavier, far more lasting. She closed not with a threat, but a reminder. Fame cannot erase consequences. Silence cannot erase memory. Control cannot erase impact. According to Jaguar Wright, what happens next won't be dictated by headlines, hashtags, or viral moments. It will be decided by whether people continue to accept fragments of truth as complete answers. Once that acceptance ends, she warned, the very structure built on secrecy begins to crack. Not all at once, but enough to shift everything that comes after. This is where the story moves beyond gossip, beyond entertainment. What the audience just witnessed, she argued, isn't about messy romances, private betrayals, or celebrity feuds. It's about what happens when trust becomes disposable and silence is rewarded over honesty. It's about how individuals can be quietly managed, redirected, and emotionally discarded, all while the public sees only polished appearances. When protecting an image matters more than protecting people, the consequences are invisible, but devastating. A faceless system, Jaguar Wright said, did exactly what it was designed to do. It absorbed impact. It redirected attention. It isolated fallout. And it moved forward, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But the people trapped inside that machinery didn't recover so easily. They were left with unanswered questions, broken connections, and a version of reality that no public statement could ever clarify. This wasn't explosive betrayal. It lingered. It settled. It reshaped how people trust, love, speak, and how they learn to remain silent. And here's the truth no one wants to admit. Stories like this endure not because they shock, but because they repeat. We've seen it with new faces, new headlines, and the same outcome every time. Silence prevails, and truth pays the price. But silence only holds power as long as attention drifts away. It survives only when people choose comfort over curiosity. So, if this story made you uneasy, that was no accident. If it left you unsettled, angry, or questioning, that's because it was never meant to feel safe. And if you're still listening, it's because part of you senses there's more beneath the surface, layers that were never meant to rise. This is not an ending. It's a pause. More details remain. More connections are hidden. And once trust is broken at this level, it never fully heals. If you're ready to see what others would rather leave buried, stay here. Stay alert. Stay awake. Don't look away. Because the truth doesn't vanish on its own. It only disappears when everyone agrees to stop noticing.